My sister-in-law threatened my daughter, and 1 hour after I made a single call, someone knocked at the door. She thought I was just a quiet accountant who'd never fight back. She thought wrong. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 15 years documenting every lie this family told, and tonight the door was about to open on all of it. Hello, everyone. Today's story was inspired by a viewer submission and adapted into a full story just for you. If you'd like to share your own story, the submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get into it. Let me take you back to 3 months ago, at my mother-in-law's 40th anniversary dinner. My name doesn't matter much to this family. For 11 years, I'd been the man in the corner, the one who carved the turkey, fixed the Wi-Fi, and paid for half the things nobody thanked me for. I'm an accountant. Quiet. People hear that and decide they already know everything about me. My wife, Karen, used to say it was my superpower, that I let people underestimate me until it was too late for them to take it back. She passed 2 years ago. After that, it was just me and our daughter, Lily. She was 8 at that dinner. She is the only reason I still showed up to these things at all. The dinner itself was normal. Too much food, too much wine, my mother-in-law telling the same stories. Lily sat next to me, drawing on a napkin, not bothering anyone, and then Diane found her opening. Diane is Karen's older sister. Charming in front of a crowd, something else entirely when the crowd looks away. She'd been circling all night, and when I got up to refill Lily's water, she followed me into the kitchen. "You know that house should have gone to my kids," she said. No greeting, just that. She was talking about the property Karen left to Lily, a piece of land Karen's father had set aside for his granddaughter before he died. Diane had been contesting it quietly for a year. I'd assumed it was just talk. "It went where Karen wanted it to go," I said. She stepped closer and lowered her voice so only I could hear it. "Things happen to little girls who get in the way. Accidents. You'd want to be careful with Lily." I stood there holding a child's plastic cup. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't react the way she wanted. I just looked at her until she smiled, patted my arm like we'd shared a joke, and walked back out to the table. I finished filling the cup. I brought it to Lily. I sat back down and ate my dessert and said goodnight to everyone like nothing had happened. But on the drive home, with Lily asleep in the back seat, my hands were steady on the wheel for the first time in years. Because Diane had made one mistake. She thought a threat would scare a quiet man into silence. She didn't know what I'd been keeping in a folder for 15 years. And the moment I got Lily into bed, I made the call. I met Karen when I was 26, doing the books for a small dental practice where she worked the front desk. She was the warmest person I'd ever met, which made it strange that she came from the family she did. The first time she brought me to a family dinner, she warned me in the car, "Just don't let Diane get under your skin. She tests people." She wasn't exaggerating. From the start, Diane treated me like an inconvenience Karen had picked up by mistake, the accountant, the boring one. She'd introduce me to people as Karen's husband, he does taxes or something. I let it slide. I was in love, and I figured a sister was a sister. You don't pick a fight with family. But the years taught me what Diane actually was. She borrowed money from her parents and never paid it back. She talked her mother into co-signing loans, then let them default. When her father got sick, she was suddenly very interested in his will and very absent from his hospital room. I watched all of it, and because nobody else in that family kept records, I did. Not out of some plan, just habit. I'm an accountant, I keep things. Receipts, emails, copies of documents people handed me to hold on to. 15 years of Diane's mess, sitting in a folder I never thought I'd need. The land was the part that mattered now. Karen's father, before he died, set aside a parcel for his only granddaughter, Lily. He didn't trust Diane with it, and he said so, in writing, in front of a lawyer. When he passed, the property went into a trust for Lily, with me as the one managing it until she's grown. Diane had been clawing at that trust for over a year, filing complaints, claiming her father wasn't in his right mind, claiming I'd manipulated him. None of it stuck, because none of it was true, and because I had every document that proved it. What I didn't have until recently was a reason to use any of it. I'd been content to let Diane lose quietly. I'm not a vengeful man by nature. I wanted peace more than I wanted to win. That changed in the kitchen at the anniversary dinner. The second she threatened Lily, the math changed. This wasn't a woman fighting over money anymore. This was a woman telling a father that his 8-year-old might have an accident. I'd spent 2 years being soft because grief had hollowed me out. But there is a part of a parent that never goes soft, and Diane had just woken it up. So when I got Lily into bed that night, I didn't sit and stew. I opened the folder, I found the number I needed, and I dialed the one person in this whole story Diane had forgotten existed. The person who had warned me years ago that this day might come. Hi everyone, if you're enjoying this story so far, take a second to drop a like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Alright, now let's get back to it. The person I called was a man named Walter Reyes. Walter had been Karen's father's lawyer for 30 years. Not just his lawyer, his friend. The two of them had served in the army together back when they were young men, and that bond lasted the rest of their lives. When Karen's father set up Lily's trust, Walter was the one who drew it up, witnessed it, and locked it down so tight that no court had been able to crack it. He was retired now, in his 70s, but still sharp, and he'd told me something at the old man's funeral that I never forgot. He'd pulled me aside that day, shaken my hands, and said, "If Diane ever comes after that girl or that trust, you call me, day or night." I made a promise to her grandfather, and I keep my promises. At the time, I thought it was just something people say at funerals. I thanked him and put his card in the folder and didn't think about it again. But I'd kept the card. I keep everything. So that night, after Lily was asleep, I dialed the number. It was past 10. He picked up on the second ring like he'd been waiting 11 years for the call. I told him exactly what happened in the kitchen, word for word. The land, the threat, the line about accidents and little girls. Walter was quiet on the other end for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. The warmth was still there, but underneath it was something cold and steady. "Say that last part again," he said. I repeated it. "Things happen to little girls who get in the way. You'd want to be careful with Lily." "She said that to your face, in the kitchen. No witnesses. Just me and her." "That's all right," Walter said. "We don't need a witness yet. We need to move first, and we need to move tonight." Then he asked me a question I wasn't expecting. He asked whether I still had the documents, all of them. The defaulted loans, the emails where Diane admitted to taking money, the formal complaints she'd filed against the trust, and most importantly, a recording. Months earlier, Diane had called me ranting about the land, and out of pure habit, I'd let my phone record the call. On that recording, in her own voice, she laid out exactly what she wanted and how far she was willing to go to get it. I told Walter I had everything, organized by date, backed up in 3 places. He let out a slow breath. "Karen always said you were the only careful one in that family." She was right. Then he said the words that started everything. "Don't go to bed. Pour yourself a coffee. In about an hour, someone is going to knock on your door. Let them in. They're with me." I hung up. I made the coffee. And I waited. The knock came at 4 minutes past 11. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, the folder open in front of me, listening to the house creak the way it does at night. When I heard the knock, 3 slow taps, I checked on Lily first. She was asleep, breathing easy, completely unaware that her father had spent the last hour rearranging the rest of her life. Then I went to the door. There were 2 people on my porch. The first was a woman, maybe 40, in a dark coat, holding a slim leather bag. The second was a younger man standing a step behind her with a laptop case over his shoulder. The woman introduced herself before I could say anything. "Mr. Hill, my name is Sandra Cole. Walter Reyes sent me. I'm an attorney. This is my associate." She held up a card so I could read it. "May we come in? We don't have a lot of time." I let them in. They sat at my kitchen table like they'd been there 100 times. Sandra looked at the open folder, the labeled tabs, the dates running down the side, and I saw something cross her face that I can only describe as relief. "Walter told me you kept records," she said. "He didn't tell me they'd be this clean. This makes my job a great deal easier." I asked her what her job actually was. She told me plainly. Diane, it turned out, was in far more trouble than even I knew. The complaints she'd been filing against Lily's trust hadn't just failed. In her last filing, she had forged a document. She had submitted a letter claiming her late father had changed his wishes about the land, and she had signed his name to it. That is not a family squabble. That is fraud against an estate, and forging a dead man's signature on a legal document is a crime the state takes seriously. Walter had suspected the letter was fake for months, but hadn't been able to prove it. What he needed was someone on the inside who could connect the forgery to everything else Diane had done over the years. The pattern, the motive. And tonight, with her threat against Lily, she'd handed me the motive on a plate. "Here is what happens next," Sandra said. "Tomorrow morning we file, not a complaint. A formal report backed by your records and that recording. Once it's filed, this stops being something Diane can talk her way out of at a dinner table." The younger man had already opened his laptop and started copying my files, photographing each document. logging the dates. It was quiet, methodical work. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was making threats. And that was the thing Diane had never understood about me. I don't shout. I sign my name to things and I keep the receipts. Sandra closed her bag. Get some sleep, Mr. Hill. Tomorrow, everything changes. They filed the next morning. I didn't see it happen. I dropped Lily off at school like any other day, told her I loved her, watched her run through the gate with her backpack bouncing. Then I went to work and did my job, because the bills don't stop just because your life is turning over underneath you. But all day, my phone sat face up on my desk and I waited. Sandra called at 2 in the afternoon. The report had been accepted. The forged letter, the one where Diane signed her dead father's name, was now part of an open file with the state. Investigators had the recording. They had my 15 years of documents. They had the trail of defaulted loans and the complaints she'd filed and the dates that lined up like fence posts. Sandra told me it would take a little time to move, but it was moving. There was no stopping it now. The first sign that Diane knew something was wrong came 2 days later. She called me. Not to threaten this time, to fish. She used her sweet voice, the one she pulled out for company, and asked how Lily was doing, said she felt bad about how things had been tense lately, said maybe we could all sit down and talk like adults. I let her talk. I didn't tell her anything. I said Lily was fine and that I was busy and I hung up. The careful man doesn't tip his hand, but I could hear it underneath her words. She was scared. Somewhere in the machinery of the court, a clerk or a contact or a rumor had reached her, and she'd realized the forged letter had a problem. She just didn't know yet how big the problem was, or that it had a name, or that the quiet brother-in-law she'd cornered in a kitchen was the one holding the other end of the rope. The second sign came when my mother-in-law called. This was harder. My mother-in-law is not a bad woman. She's just spent her whole life making excuses for her oldest daughter. She called crying, asking what was going on, saying Diane had told her I was trying to destroy the family. I sat with that for a moment. Then I told her the truth, plainly, with no anger in my voice. I told her Diane had threatened Lily. I told her Diane had forged her late husband's signature on a legal document. I told her I had proof of both. There was a long silence on the line. And then my mother-in-law said something surprised me. She said, I believe you. She said she'd seen the letter Diane was waving around and that the handwriting had never looked right to her, but she'd been too afraid to say so. That was the first domino. The family's protection of Diane had finally cracked, and once one person stops covering for someone, the others start remembering what they saw too. Once my mother-in-law started talking, the whole family started talking. It turned out I wasn't the only one who'd been quietly carrying things. I was just the only one who'd written them down. Karen had a younger brother named Tom. For years, Tom and I had been friendly but distant, the way men and families sometimes are. We nodded at holidays and talked about nothing. But 2 days after my mother-in-law called, Tom showed up at my door on a weeknight, asked if he could come in, and sat at the same kitchen table where Sandra had sat. He looked like a man who'd been holding his breath for a long time. He told me Diane had borrowed $8,000 from him 3 years ago for what she called a medical emergency. There was no emergency. He'd found out later she'd used it to cover a gambling debt. He'd never told anyone because he was embarrassed. And because Diane had warned him that if he made it a problem, she'd tell their mother he was the one who couldn't be trusted with money. He'd believed her. That was how Diane worked. She found the thing you were ashamed of, and she stood on it. I should have said something years ago, Tom said. I let her do this to everybody because I was scared of looking like the bad guy. Karen would be ashamed of me. I told him Karen wouldn't be ashamed. I told him Karen spent her whole life being the only kind person at that table, and that the kind people are usually the ones who get walked on the longest. Then I told him about the forged letter and the trust and the threat against Lily. Tom's face changed when I got to Lily. He has 2 kids of his own. What do you need from me, he said. Not a question. An offer. I told him the truth was enough. I didn't need him to lie or exaggerate or take sides out of loyalty to me. I just needed him to tell investigators, honestly, what he knew about the $8,000 and the pattern behind it. He agreed before I finished the sentence. Within a week, the family had split clean down the middle. On one side stood Diane and her husband and her 2 grown children, who either believed her or were too tangled up in her to walk away. On the other side stood my mother-in-law, Tom, and 2 cousins who suddenly remembered their own stories about money that went missing and promises that were never kept. People who'd spent years pretending they hadn't noticed anything, were now comparing notes at kitchen tables all over the city. Diane felt it. You can always feel it when the room turns. She started calling people, working the phones, doing what she'd always done. But this time the script wasn't working. This time the family had something it never had before. They had proof and they had each other. A cornered person doesn't get quieter, they get louder. And Diane got very loud. Her first move was to play the victim. She went to every relative who would still pick up the phone and told them I had manipulated a grieving old man, that I'd turned her own mother against her, that I was using Lily as a shield to steal land that should have gone to her children. She cried on those calls. She was good at it. She'd had decades of practice. A few people who didn't know the full story started to wonder if maybe there were two sides to this. Her second move was worse, and it was aimed straight at me. Diane filed a complaint, claiming I was an unfit father. She said I was unstable since Karen's death, that I was obsessive, that I kept files on family members like some kind of paranoid man, that Lily wasn't safe in my care. She used my own carefulness against me. The very habit that was about to sink her, she tried to turn into evidence that I was the dangerous one. She requested that the court look into custody. She wanted Lily taken out of my home. I will be honest. That one landed. The thought of someone questioning whether Lily was safe with me, the one person who had given up everything to raise her alone, made my hands shake for the first time in this whole story. For a night, I was scared. Not angry, scared. Then I called Sandra, and Sandra was not scared at all. This is the best thing she could have done, Sandra told me. She just put her own judgment and credibility on the record. She's accusing you of keeping files. Good. The files are accurate, dated, and corroborated. She's accusing you of being unstable. You're a working professional with no record, raising a child who is healthy, in school, and loved. The moment a court compares the two of you, she loses. She isn't attacking your weak point. She's dragging us toward the exact ground where we're strongest. She told me to do nothing rash. Don't respond to Diane, don't post anything, don't argue with relatives. Just keep being the steady, boring, careful man I'd always been, and let the contrast speak. So that's what I did. While Diane made phone calls and filed complaints and worked herself into a corner, I made Lily's lunches and helped with her homework and showed up to her school recital and clapped louder than anyone. I let my whole life be the evidence. And here is the thing Diane never understood, even at the end. She thought she was fighting a quiet accountant. She kept attacking the parts of me she could see. But every move she made got entered into a record somewhere, and every record had a date. And I had spent 15 years learning that dates don't lie even when people do. She'd built a trap for me. She just hadn't noticed she was standing in it. The custody complaint required a hearing. Diane wanted one, she got one, and the hearing was where everything she'd built came down at once. Sandra had warned me it might feel slow and unsatisfying, that real proceedings don't move like the ones on television. But she also told me to watch what happened when documents meet a person who has been lying for years. Liars improvise, she said. Paper doesn't. We went in with a binder. Diane went in with a story. Her story was the same one she'd been telling everyone. Grieving widower, obsessive, dangerous, keeping files, manipulating an old man. She told it well at first. Then Sandra began calmly to lay the paper next to the words. When Diane claimed I'd manipulated her father into changing his will, Sandra produced the trust documents, dated and witnessed by Walter Reyes years before Karen even got sick, with her father's own statement explaining in plain language why he didn't trust Diane with the land. Diane said the documents were fake. Sandra called Walter, who was sitting in the room, and Walter quietly confirmed he'd drafted every page himself. When Diane claimed I was unstable and kept files to harass the family, Sandra agreed that yes, I kept records, and then she opened them. The defaulted loans, the $8,000 from Tom, the complaints Diane had filed and lost, and then the letter. The one where Diane's had signed her dead father's name. Sandra placed the forged letter next to 3 genuine signatures of the late man, pulled from documents spanning 20 years. Even from where I sat, you could see it. The forgery wasn't close. Diane had been so confident no one would ever check that she hadn't even tried very hard. And then Sandra played the recording. The room went still. It was Diane's own voice, months old, ranting about the land, saying out loud exactly what she wanted and exactly how far she'd go. There is no way to play a victim while your own voice fills a room admitting the truth. Diane sat there and listened to herself, and I watched the story she'd spent her whole life telling finally run out of road. Her custody complaint didn't just fail, it collapsed. The very thing she'd filed to paint me as paranoid had forced all of my evidence onto the official record, exactly as Sandra said it would. Diane had reached for a weapon and handed it to me. The forgery was already a separate matter with the state, and now it had a hearing's worth of context attached to it. There was nothing left for her to spin. No phone call could fix this, no tears. No sisters to stand on, no brother to threaten, no mother to hide behind. All of that was gone, sitting on the other side of the aisle, watching her quietly. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and steady and clear. Diane had spent years building this. I had simply kept the receipts. The consequences didn't all arrive at once. They arrived the way a tide comes in, steady and impossible to push back. The forgery case moved forward. Signing a dead man's name to a legal document submitted to a court is not something you walk away from with an apology. Diane pleaded with everyone she could reach, but the file was no longer in the family's hands. It belonged to the state now, and the state does not care about tears or holiday dinners. She ended up facing formal charges. Her lawyer negotiated it down to keep her out of a cell, but the result was a guilty plea on her record, restitution she had to pay, and a court order barring her from ever going near Lily's trust again. The land was locked. It would go to Lily and only to Lily, exactly as her grandfather had wanted. The financial side caught up with her too. Once the family stopped covering for Diane, the money she'd taken stopped being a secret and started being a debt. Tom didn't sue her, but he didn't forgive the $8,000 either. My mother-in-law, who had quietly bailed Diane out for 30 years, finally stopped. She told Diane she loved her, and then she told her she would not give her another dollar. For Diane, who had always treated her mother as a bank that never closed, that was its own kind of sentence. The social cost was the one that seemed to hurt her most. Diane had built her whole life on being the charming one, the one people believed. That was gone. You cannot forge a dead man's signature, threaten a child, and get caught on a recording, and still be the person the family turns to. The relatives who had wavered during her counterattack had heard the recording, too. There was no version of the story left that made her the victim. She was simply finally seen. Her husband stayed with her, which I think surprised some people. Her grown children pulled away. They'd spent their lives being told the land should have been theirs. And now they understood what their mother had been willing to do to get it. That is a hard thing to learn about a parent. I didn't take any pleasure in it. Those kids didn't choose Diane. They just got her. As for the rest of the family, something strange happened. They got closer. Tom and I started talking for real, not just holiday nods. My mother-in-law began calling me just to check on Lily, and slowly, the woman who'd spent years overlooking me started treating me like a son. Karen would have liked that. She'd spent her whole life trying to get this family to be honest with each other. It took her absence and a folder and a recording to finally make it happen. Diane got the thing she'd always wanted least. She got the truth, told out loud, in front of everyone, with nowhere left to hide. It's been a year now since the night I made that call. Lily is 9. She doesn't know most of what happened, and I intend to keep it that way until she's old enough to understand it without it scaring her. What she knows is that her grandfather loved her enough to leave her something, and that one day, when she's grown, there's a piece of land with her name on it that nobody can ever take away. I drove her out to see it last month. We sat on the tailgate of my truck and ate sandwiches and looked at the trees, and she asked if we could build a house there someday. I told her she could build anything she wanted. It's hers. The trust is secure. Walter checked every lock on it himself before he finally let himself fully retire. He calls sometimes just to ask about Lily. He made a promise to her grandfather, and in his mind, that promise didn't end when the case did. I send him a card every holiday. I keep his number in the folder where I keep everything. Things with the family settled into something I never expected. Tom comes over with his kids on weekends now. My mother-in-law has Sunday dinners, and I'm always invited, and for the first time in 11 years, I actually want to go. The seat that used to be Karen's empty space at the table has slowly filled with something warmer. They look at me differently now, not as the boring accountant in the corner, as the man who protected the youngest person in the family when it mattered. Diane is not part of any of that. She moved to another state with her husband. I don't hear about her much, and I don't ask. The last I knew, she was still paying back what she owed and still telling whoever would listen that she was the one who'd been wronged. Some people never put the receipts down. They just keep handing them to strangers who don't know any better. I think about that night a lot. The kitchen, The plastic cup in my hand, the way she leaned in close and threatened my daughter because she was certain a quiet man would stay quiet. She had me wrong from the very beginning. She mistook patience for weakness. She thought because I didn't shout, I wouldn't fight. But there is no fight in the world a parent won't get up for. And the quietest people are often the ones keeping the most careful record of everything you've done. I never raised my voice. I never made a threat. I just made one phone call, opened a folder I'd been keeping for 15 years, and let the truth do what the truth does. She knocked the first domino over herself the moment she went after my little girl. I just made sure I was holding the receipts when it fell. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.